It started with a phone call from the deputy coroner. A woman's body had turned up off a service road just past mile marker 8, tucked behind a rusting cattle fence no one had touched in years. The place was rural, even for Harlan County. Dense trees, low cell service, and nothing but the sound of buzzards circling if you stood still too long. From what the coroner said, the body wasn't fresh. She'd been out there for at least 2 days, maybe more. No purse, no phone, no shoes. Just a torn navy windbreaker and a locket around her neck, with the hinges rusted shut. Local boys riding dirt bikes found her. One of them puked, the other called 911. I drove out before breakfast, not because I had to, but because something in the coroner's voice made my gut itch. I've learned to listen when that happens. When I got there, the scene was already roped off. County patrol cars blinked against the gray mist, and Sheriff Bellinger stood back with his hands on his hips, talking low to the techs. I nodded once, ducked under the tape, and made my way to the ridge where the body lay. She looked about 30, maybe younger. Thin frame, bruising around the neck, faint contusions on her temple, no signs of animal predation, which told me the buzzards hadn't touched her yet. That meant she hadn't been here long. Cold nights probably preserved her better than usual. But that wasn't the part that made me pause. What stopped me was her face. It wasn't bloated or damaged. It just looked peaceful, like she'd been placed there. There were no drag marks, no tire treads, no blood trails. Either she walked there and collapsed, or someone carried her in without leaving a trace. We bagged the body and ran prints the same day. I figured we'd come up empty. Jane does in rural counties usually are just that. Unclaimed women running from something or someone, with no past that'll ring any bells in the system. But this time, the system screamed. An hour later, the lab called me directly. Not a tech, not a clerk. Head of biometric ID down in Charleston. His voice was tight. "We ran your Jane Doe," he said, "and we got a match." I said, "Good. Who is she?" And he hesitated. "The system says she's Judith Ann Beckley. Fingerprints match 10 out of 10. I jotted the name down. "Okay," I said, "send me her file." Then he said the part that made my pen freeze. "Detective, Judith Beckley died in 1972. House fire. 10 years old. Body recovered, buried. Fingerprints were taken before death as part of a child ID program back then. But unless someone made a catastrophic clerical error, you're looking at a woman whose prints shouldn't exist anymore." I didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then I asked the only question that mattered. "Are you sure the prints match?" He said yes. He triple-checked. I hung up, pulled the scene photos from my dash, and stared at the victim again. Her hands were folded across her chest in the image, neatly. Almost like someone laid her to rest on purpose. Judith Beckley, dead since 1972, but lying right now on a slab in Harlan County with bruises on her throat and $20 sewn into the lining of her jacket. I drove straight to records, pulled the original fire report. July 12, 1972. Beckley family residence, rural route near Clay Fork. Fire started around midnight. Cause, electrical fault. House burned down in under 20 minutes. Parents survived. Daughter found in the hallway outside her room. No foul play suspected. Death ruled accidental. Body buried at Oak Hollow Cemetery 2 days later. I visited the cemetery myself, found the headstone. Small, white marble. Judith Ann Beckley, 1962 through 1972. Beloved daughter, now with angels. I stood there longer than I meant to. Birds chirped. Wind moved through the pine. Nothing felt off, except for everything. Back at the station, I started calling people. The original investigator on the fire case was long dead. The medical examiner retired in Florida. I called anyway, got his daughter, left a message. Then I pulled up the Beckley family. Father died in 1994. Mother, Marla Beckley, was still alive, 83, living in a care home 2 towns over. Early dementia, limited visitors, no listed phone. I made a note to visit her in person. But first, I had to deal with the body. The autopsy came back clean. No drugs, no alcohol. Cause of death, manual strangulation. No ligature marks. No fingerprints on the locket. No defensive wounds. No sign of sexual assault. Time of death estimated 3 days before discovery. Then came the oddest detail. Her locket, inside it held a folded paper. Microprint, like the kind used on classified documents. Barely visible without magnification. When Tex unfolded it, it wasn't a photo. It was a number. Just a number. 11 digits. I ran it through our systems. Not a social. Not a bank account. Not a routing number. Not any known federal or state code. But when I sent it to a contact in military intel, he called back fast. Said that number was scrubbed. No trace. But the format matched a decommissioned tracking system used for asset control in the 80s. Asset control, as in human assets. I asked him to explain. He said black programs, experimental IDs, used on personnel involved in classified trials, medical, psychological, sometimes behavioral conditioning. All records destroyed by 1996. You didn't hear that from me. I didn't respond. Just stared at the number written on my notepad. Then I looked at the victim again. No ID, no name, but her fingerprints said she was a girl who died in 1972, and her locket held a code from a black project that didn't officially exist. Either someone faked all this to send a message, or the message was that she never died at all. And if that's true, then someone's been lying for over 50 years. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw that headstone, now with angels. That little phrase bothered me more than it should have. I've seen hundreds of graves, thousands of death certificates, and plenty of grieving parents who chose words like that because it helped them sleep. But now I wondered if someone put that phrase there, not for comfort, but to seal the story, to keep the lid shut. I drove to the care home first thing in the morning. Facility was called Willow Ridge, right off the state highway. Looked more like a converted motel than a medical center. I showed my badge, asked for Marla Beckley. The nurse at the front desk hesitated, then said she wasn't doing well. Confused most days, rarely spoke. I asked to see her anyway. She was sitting in a chair by the window, blanket tucked around her legs, eyes fixed on a bird feeder. I sat down slow, introduced myself, and told her I was looking into something involving her daughter. She blinked once, no recognition. I tried again. Judith, I said, your little girl. Do you remember her? She turned her head toward me like it took every ounce of energy. Then she said, she liked birds, blue ones. She said they were angels in disguise. I didn't respond right away. Her voice was dry, like wind through paper. Then she looked at me, not past me, not through me, but at me, and said, you saw her, didn't you? I nodded. Her eyes filled, not with fear, not with surprise, just sadness. She whispered, I told them they were wrong. I leaned forward, asked what she meant. She didn't answer right away, just said, they took her. They brought a box and told us not to open it. My husband did anyway. He said it wasn't her. I asked who they were. She looked toward the window again. People with no names, no badges, just paper and silence. That's what they gave us. Paper and silence. Her hand trembled as she reached toward the end table beside her. I helped her open the drawer. Inside was an envelope. Sealed, old, yellowed around the corners. She placed it in my palm without a word. Back in my car, I opened it. Inside was a letter. No date, no signature, just typed words on fading paper. If this ever reaches the surface, know that Project Cassiel was never terminated. The girl was never dead. You buried a body we gave you. Her fingerprints were never erased. That was it. No letterhead, no agency seal. Just those lines, and an attached photo. Black and white, grainy. A girl in a hospital gown standing beside a man in uniform. Her expression was blank, eyes too old for a child. I flipped it over. On the back, a typed label. Judith-Site 6B, 1973. That was a year after her supposed death. I sat there a long time, watching the sun rise over the parking lot. Then I drove to the county archives. Old boxes, microfilm, dusty records no one had touched in decades. I needed the autopsy file from 1972, the one for Judith Ann Beckley. After 2 hours, I found it. It had been marked confidential. That's unusual for child fire victims unless there's foul play. I opened it slowly. The file was thin. 2 pages. 1 report. 1 form. Cause of death: carbon monoxide inhalation and thermal injury. Estimated time of death: unknown. Body ID'd by parents. But then, at the bottom, in a different pen, added later, no dental records available. Body charred beyond facial recognition. Fingerprints not collected due to tissue damage. Wait, I read it again. Fingerprints not collected, but the system said otherwise. Charleston had matched 10 prints to Judith. If no prints were taken from the body in 1972, then where did Charleston's match come from? Someone either faked them now, or faked them back then. I called Charleston again, asked to speak directly to the lab tech who'd run the initial scan. He got on the line, nervous. I asked him where the prints had come from. What original file, what database? He said they were from the Federal Juvenile Archive, archived in 1969 as part of a national child safety program. I asked if that system was ever tampered with. He said it was air-gapped, immutable, military grade. No one changes what's in there, he said, not without someone noticing. So the prints were real, which meant the girl we found was Judith Beckley. Not a look-alike, not a twin, not a mistake, but Judith herself, and she hadn't died in that fire. I called an old contact in Virginia who once worked on archival cleanup for Cold War programs. I gave him the name, Project Casio. He went quiet, said it sounded like something he'd heard in passing. PSYOPs, maybe. Psychological endurance testing, tied to early MK-type trials. He warned me to be careful. Some of those subjects were disappeared. Not debriefed, disappeared. I asked what they were testing. He said, identity stress thresholds, the point at which a person loses the thread of who they are. That hit me hard. What kind of child would they use for that? Why Judith? Was she taken because she was vulnerable or because she had something they needed? And what happened after 1973? Did they keep her in that facility until she escaped? Was she released? Or was she simply discarded, like so many other secrets buried under flags and dust? I drove home and locked the letter and photo in a fireproof case. Then I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't touched in 5 years. Not since the Fane Hollow incident. Special Agent Laurel Keevers, the voice said. I introduced myself, told her everything. She didn't laugh. She didn't question. She just said, "We've been waiting for this case to resurface." I asked her what she meant. She said, "Judith Beckley is not the first." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Then how many?" I asked. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "We only know about the ones who come back." I met Agent Laurel Keevers at a gas station just off Route 42, about an hour outside Charleston. She didn't wear a badge, no official vehicle, just jeans, boots, and a windbreaker that could have passed for any regular civilian. But her eyes gave her away, alert, watchful, the kind that saw too much and said too little. I brought the photo and the envelope from the Beckley home, but I didn't hand them over. I laid them flat on the diner table and watched her face while she read. She didn't blink. When she reached the line about the body not being Judith's, her fingers curled slightly, like something inside her had just confirmed itself. "You've seen this before," I said. Not a question. She nodded. "Not this exact file, but the pattern. Girl declared dead, case sealed fast. Any follow-up buried under enough red tape to choke a courthouse." I asked how long she'd been following these cases. She said, "Since I found one of my own, 20 years ago. A boy, same deal. Declared dead, turned up 3 counties over with scars he couldn't explain and no memory of his own name." I asked what tied them together. She tapped the envelope. "Casio. Always that name. Sometimes in the paper, sometimes whispered in facility logs. Never officially written, except once." She pulled out a laminated card from her jacket, a photocopy of an old interdepartmental memo. It was dated 1974. The words were stamped, "Eyes only, Project Casio, Test Group A. Dissociative response validated. Further repetition authorized." I stared at the line, then asked, "What does repetitions mean?" She looked me dead in the eye. "It means they didn't just do it once. They repeated the trauma, again and again, to see how the child's identity would bend or snap." We sat in silence a moment. The diner's radio played some soft country tune I didn't recognize. Behind us, a waitress poured coffee for a trucker who had no idea we were talking about state-sanctioned identity erasure. Laurel finally said, "Judith Beckley may be the first to make it all the way home, but I doubt she did it alone. If she came back, someone helped her, someone who knew what she was." I leaned back. "So who kills her then? A handler gone rogue? Someone trying to shut her up?" She hesitated. "Or someone she remembered? You don't spend your life having your identity broken into pieces without trying to find out who broke it." Back in Harlan, I got a message from the forensic team. They'd pulled something from under the victim's fingernails. Not skin, not fabric, paper, tiny shreds. We scanned the fragments. Turns out they came from a newspaper, dated 2003, from a town in Maryland, Chestertown. We pulled the microfiche. The story was about a missing girl. Name, Alina K. No last name provided. The article said she was part of a special foster program that housed children with exceptional psychological profiles. Laurel's face tightened when she saw the headline. That's one of the feeder towns, she said. Back in the 70s and 80s, the agency used places like Chestertown to move kids off-grid. Called it rehoming. I asked her what exceptional profiles meant. It meant the child could dissociate, she said. Could survive a false identity. Could be trained to believe one life while living another. I felt bile rise in my throat. The paper had a photo. It was Judith, only older. She was listed as a counselor. Alina, age 30, worked at the facility until it closed. Vanished after a fire in the dorm wing. Sound familiar? Another fire, another disappearance. That one never made national news. Just a local blip, chalked up to system failure. But here's what chilled me. The boy she had been counseling. His name wasn't listed, but a blurry image showed him holding her hand. His face was familiar. Not to me, but to Laurel. She leaned in, adjusted her glasses, and whispered, "That's Theo." I asked who that was. She said, "One of the children I told you about. The boy who came back broken." I asked where he was now. She swallowed hard. "He's been off the grid for 10 years. I tried to keep him safe, but if he saw Judith again, if he thought she lied to him." She didn't finish. We both knew what that meant. Judith might have come back to warn him, or protect him, or apologize. But if Theo's trauma was deep enough, and if he believed she was part of what hurt him, then it wouldn't take much for guilt to turn to rage. The kind of rage that leaves bruises around the neck. We tracked down the last known address he used. An old rental cabin in Allegheny County. Laurel and I drove out together. The place was boarded up. Inside, it smelled of mold and gasoline. The couch was shredded, walls covered in newspaper clippings. None newer than 2005. But on one wall was something we didn't expect. A map. Strings connected points across the East Coast. Every city tied to a missing child or a closed psychiatric facility. All of them marked with red pins. Except one, Harlan County. That one was marked black. We found a journal on the floor beside the bed. First few pages were blank. Then came one sentence, repeated over and over. She remembered me. Then she remembered me. Then she remembered me. And ride. We bagged the journal and took photos of the cabin wall before the light faded. Laurel didn't say much as she moved through the rooms. Her eyes kept going back to the map. There was something personal in the way she looked at it, like she'd already walked every dot on that paper but hadn't known how close they were to each other until now. I stepped outside to clear my head. The wind was picking up, and there was that smell again. Smoke. Faint but lingering. I asked Laurel if she smelled it too. She said yes, but the chimney was cold. No recent fire. That's when I checked the backyard and saw the shallow pit. It wasn't much, just some burned pages, barely ash, but the burn pattern was off. Controlled, like someone had stacked the papers vertically, not spread them out. There were melted corners of what looked like old photos and a metal tag worked by heat. We couldn't save most of it, but one edge of a photograph had survived. A child's hand holding a butterfly. No face, but the butterfly had something odd about it. Its wings were stamped with numbers. Not drawn, not printed. Stamped. Laurel froze when she saw it. "That's a training image," she said quietly. "We used to test pattern recall. The butterflies were numbered in sequences. If the child named them in order, they passed." I didn't know what disturbed me more, that they used butterflies to test memory, or that this boy, Theo, had kept that picture for decades only to burn it. Back at the station, we reviewed the journal. Most of it was cryptic, fragmented, but near the end he'd written something that stuck with me. She said I was real, but they made me from someone else. That line, it hit like a hammer. Laurel sat down, slowly, and whispered, "They cloned her memory." I stared at her. "What are you talking about?" She took a breath. In the final stages of Project Cassio, the goal shifted. It wasn't just identity suppression. It was identity transfer. They take the memories of a subject and implant fragments into others, through hypnosis, sensory conditioning, sometimes even chemical triggers. Theo might have been one of those subjects, a receiver. I asked, "So you think he wasn't just a victim? He was built from her?" Laurel nodded. "In part. They'd never admit to it, but if they were trying to recreate resilience, Judith's profile would have been perfect. She survived the early stages longer than anyone. Her personality held even under prolonged trauma." I felt my throat go dry. "So, when she came back," Laurel finished the thought, "she represented the truth. that he wasn't born, he was made. And maybe that she tried to stop it, but failed. I stood and paced. So he kills her, not out of hate, out of confusion, betrayal, because she's the only one who could tell him what he really was. We sat in silence. I couldn't shake the image of a boy raised in false memories, built out of someone else's pain. No wonder he snapped, but something still didn't fit. If Theo killed her, why come back to Harlan? Why mark it with a black pin on the map? Laurel's answer chilled me, because this was where she was born, not physically, but in identity. Judith Beckley was the first subject, Site 0. If he was trying to erase what he was, he'd start by erasing the source. Later that night, the coroner called again. They'd missed something. The locket, beneath the lining, had another compartment, so thin it barely showed on X-ray. Inside, it was a chip, old but still intact. Data encrypted, not commercial. Military. We handed it to a forensics expert who owed Laurel a favor. He ran it through his offline decryptor. What we got back wasn't a file. It was a video. 17 seconds. Black and white. No sound. The image showed a girl, Judith, sitting in a small, windowless room. She was maybe 11. Her hands were folded. A man off camera held up cards, one by one. She responded each time, not with speech, but with sign language. The last card he held said, "Do you remember?" She paused, then nodded. That was the end of the clip. But something about the way she nodded, slow, heavy, like the memory cost her something, stuck with me. She hadn't forgotten. Not her name, not her past, not the things done to her. And she carried that memory across 50 years, buried beneath fake names, foster homes, and blank records, until she couldn't carry it anymore. I made a decision. We couldn't chase Theo through the woods and shadows of the past, but we could find his origin point, the original Site 0. Laurel pulled every document she had. One name came up again and again, connected to land purchases and medical subcontracting around 1970. Norris Vale, a corporate shell tied to defense projects, all of them quietly terminated by 1980. One of their properties, a decommissioned children's rehab center outside Silver Ridge, 30 miles from where Judith's body was found. That night, I loaded my service weapon, just in case, because something told me Site 0 wasn't empty. We left for Silver Ridge under the cover of night. Not because we were hiding, though I suppose we were, but because Laurel said most of the things tied to Project Cassiel only made sense in the dark. The roads were old, cracked with frost lines and tree roots, curving through valleys that hadn't seen a new house in decades. When we turned off the main road and followed a gravel path leading into thick brush, the trees swallowed our headlights. At the end of the trail stood a chain-link fence, rusted in spots, gate padlocked but hanging loose. Someone had cut through years ago. We didn't even have to climb. The building beyond it looked like a chapel that had lost its congregation. Concrete walls, a single archway at the front, no signage, just vines crawling over the sides, and the faint outline of an old emblem burned into the stone. Something like a cross, but with 3 horizontal bars instead of 1. Laurel said that emblem had shown up in one of the original memos from 1972. I asked her if this was the place. She said this is where they started pretending the truth was a disorder. The inside smelled like copper and mildew. Flashlight beams caught remnants of furniture. Beds bolted to the floor, straps still dangling from the corners. There were rooms with peeling wallpaper, rooms without doors, and in one of the central halls, a room entirely lined with mirrors. Most were shattered, but the one still intact warped your reflection like carnival glass. My face looked stretched, ghost-like. Laurel didn't look into the mirrors. She kept her eyes on the floor. We found a stairwell leading to the basement. The door at the bottom was marked. Records. The hinges screamed when we pushed it open. Inside were filing cabinets rusted shut, some so swollen from moisture they'd burst open. The air was heavier down there. My breathing slowed without me realizing it. Laurel found a cabinet that had been forced open long ago. The folders inside were stamped with years. 1969, 1970, 1971, all labeled Trial B. Then we found one marked Subject 303-JAB. Laurel froze. "Judith Ann Beckley," she whispered. We pulled the file. Water damage had erased most of the ink, but parts of it remained readable. Session transcripts, dosage charts, a page labeled Memory Reinsertion Trial 3. Result, Partial retention. Emotional fracture present. I read the words out loud. Emotional fracture present? Laurel said. That meant she remembered what they did, but couldn't speak of it without shutting down. It's a defense, she said. Some children found ways to bury what they knew, just deep enough to function. I flipped another page. It had photos. One showed Judith sitting across from another child, a boy. The name under it was blacked out, but someone had written over it in pen. T. My heart thudded. Theo? Laurel nodded. I think they were paired, possibly bonded. I asked what that meant. Each child was made to reflect the other. If one failed, the other would be punished. It created dependency, but also rage. That's when I heard something shift above us. It wasn't wind. It wasn't an animal. It was deliberate. Soft footfall. We killed our flashlights. Waited. Another step. I reached for my weapon. Laurel motioned for silence. We crept back up the stairs slowly, one step at a time. At the top, the hallway was still empty, but a door that had been closed earlier now stood open. The mirror room. I motioned for Laurel to circle left while I moved right. We entered from opposite ends. He was standing in front of the only intact mirror. Theo. Older than the photo. Early 40s maybe. Gaunt. Pale. Hair slicked back like it hadn't seen water in a week. He didn't flinch when we stepped in. Didn't move. Just looked at himself, unmoving, like he was trying to see if his face matched the memories. Laurel whispered, Theo. His eyes flicked toward her, but his body stayed still. She said, We know what they did to you. We know who Judith was. He whispered back, You don't know anything. You weren't there. I stepped forward, kept my tone even. We want to understand. He turned slowly. She came back to remind me. She said the mirror was never broken, that it was me, that I was the break. His voice was trembling now. But I saw what she did. I remember. She watched them hurt me, and she said nothing. I said, She was a child, too. He shook his head violently. She knew. She remembered everything. They built me from her pain. I carry it like a disease. Then his eyes met mine, and when I looked at her face, I didn't see her. I saw what they made me forget. I took a slow step closer. So you brought her here. He didn't answer. Laurel asked, What did she say, Theo, before she died? His mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. Then he said, almost childlike, she said, I remember you when you were whole. That's when I saw his hands were bleeding. Not fresh. Self-inflicted, old scars reopened. He held them up. I thought if I killed her the memories would leave, but they're louder now. Laurel stepped forward. Come with us. This doesn't end here. You're not done. He shook his head. No, they're not done. Suddenly he reached into his jacket. I drew. Fast. But it wasn't a weapon. It was a tape. Old. Labeled in handwriting. Site 0 - final session. He tossed it to the ground. Burn it, he said. Or don't. Doesn't matter. The truth's already leaking. Then he turned and bolted out the shattered window. Glass raining behind him. By the time we made it outside, he was gone. Remained was that tape. And the look in the mirror he left behind. I didn't run after him. Not because I couldn't, but because I knew what it meant when someone like Theo disappeared into the woods. He wasn't running to hide. He was running to protect whatever fragile idea of himself he still had left. A man like that doesn't go looking for justice. He's already served his sentence. I watched the darkness swallow him, and for a moment, I honestly hoped I wouldn't see him again. Laurel stood beside me, the busted mirror still glinting behind us, and for a while, neither of us spoke. Then she picked up the tape Theo had dropped. Her hand was steady, but her voice was quiet. He gave us what he could, she said, even if it hurts. We took the tape back to my place. The precinct was too exposed. Too many ears. Too many people who'd ask why a retired detective and a federal ghost were sitting in the records room after midnight threading ancient government audio. I had an old reel-to-reel in the garage. One of those clunky things I kept for sentimental reasons. Back when confessions came with clicks and static and the truth didn't live on someone's cloud. I cleaned the heads, ran a dry pass-through, and we loaded the tape. No label date. Just that handwriting. Site 0 - final session. I hit play. It started with hiss and silence, like the tape itself was holding its breath. Then a man's voice. Flat, clinical, the kind of voice that sounded like it wore a white coat even if you couldn't see the face. What's your name? He asked. A pause. Then a girl answered. Judith. Her voice was small, clear, like glass just before it cracks. He asked for her last name. She hesitated. They told me not to say it anymore. He said, say it anyway. She obeyed. Beckley. He asked her what they practiced. She said she remembered. He told her to say what they taught if someone asked where she'd been. I was sick, she answered, like she was reading it from somewhere behind her eyes. Then the question that froze me. And if someone asks what happened to the others? There was a pause so long I thought the tape had broken. But then, quietly, there were no others. The man said, very good, Judith. And then, the tape clicked, rewound, started again. Same script, same order, same tone. It wasn't therapy. It was conditioning. A loop meant to erase her, over and over again until the lie took root deeper than the truth. Laurel reached over and paused the tape. This is where she started forgetting herself, she said. I stared at the spools turning. I'd heard children lie before, but I'd never heard one trained to forget. Then how'd she come back? I asked. Laurel just shook her head. Because forgetting isn't the same as healing, and the brain always remembers what it was told to bury. We cross-checked parts of the audio with whatever was left in public declassified records. One line matched a transcript from 1973, a report from Project Casio labeled Memory Reinsertion Trial 3. Subject 3, Judith, it said. Instability persists. Transfer recommended. I asked Laura what transfer meant. She said it could mean anything. Relocation to foster care, reassignment to another test site, or something worse. They didn't always document the exit, she said. Sometimes they just marked the file closed. I couldn't shake the sound of Judith's voice. Not the words, but the rhythm. It was like she'd repeated that conversation so many times, it became a prayer, or a spell. I asked Laurel how many others had the same tape. She didn't answer, just said too many. We started calling anyone who'd worked at facilities tied to Casio. Most were ghosts, or dead, but one number rang. A woman picked up, elderly. Her voice cracked when I said the name Judith Beckley. Then she hung up. 30 minutes later, she called back, told me her name was Elise. She gave me an address, asked me not to come in uniform, said she didn't want to be seen opening that part of her life again. We met at a rest stop off Route 29. She sat in my car, eyes scanning every headlight that passed. She told me that in 1985, a girl came into her care. Name on file, Alina K. But she said it was fake. No birth certificate, no family history, just a federal letter stamped special clearance. Elise worked intake at a youth psychiatric home in Maryland, one of those Casio-funded places with locked doors and clean floors. She said the girl barely spoke, but when she did, it was in loops. Phrases that didn't fit the moment, and she hated mirrors, would cover them up. But she'd draw butterflies for hours, dozens of them, all with little numbers on their wings. That's when I showed Elise the photo we found in Theo's cabin, the one from the burned pile, the butterfly with the numbered wings. She covered her mouth. That's her, she whispered. That's what she used to draw. She said the butterflies remembered the things people forgot. I asked her what happened to the girl. Elise shook her head. She disappeared. One night, fire alarms went off. We found the girl's bed empty, her file gone. Whole wing shut down next day. I was told not to talk about it. Said it was reclassification. Reclassification. I'd heard that word before. It was government speak for deletion. I drove home with that word stuck in my throat. Judith wasn't just buried. She was recycled. The tape, the drawings, the looped language, they weren't mistakes. They were tools, and someone had used her as a template for something bigger. That's what Theo meant when he said she wasn't who she claimed to be. Because in the eyes of whoever ran Site Zero, Judith wasn't a girl. She was a program. And now the last copy of that program was walking around the woods with blood on his hands. I didn't sleep that night. Laurel didn't either. I could tell by the way she sat near the window, watching the street like she expected Theo to show up on the sidewalk and hand her the rest of the story. We played that tape one more time. Not because we thought we'd hear something new, but because I needed to listen to her voice again. Judith, the real one. The one who'd been 10 years old and told to forget everything. The one who remembered anyway. Around sunrise, I drove out to the cemetery, Oak Hollow. Same spot I'd stood at days earlier, back when I still thought this was a simple misidentification. The headstone hadn't moved. Still small, still white, still had that carved lie about angels. I looked at it and asked a question I wasn't sure anyone could answer. Did they bury a body at all? Or was it always just a box with ashes and paperwork? I scraped some moss off the base and found a tiny chip in the marble. Not enough to mean anything, but it felt symbolic somehow. Like even the stone didn't believe the story anymore. Back in town, I called an old friend who owed me favors. Tommy Gray. He used to be with the Office of Inspector General before he retired to Florida. He still had access to the kinds of clearance levels I couldn't touch. I gave him one word: Cassiel. 10 minutes later, he called me back, voice lower than usual. "I don't know what you're into," he said, "but someone ran a keyword trace the minute I opened the file. My screen went black. Whole system locked me out." I asked him what he saw before that. "Just one sentence," he said. "Authorized personnel only. Site Alpha currently active." That didn't make sense. Site Alpha was supposed to be a myth, a dumping ground for legends about government testing sites that never made it to paper. I asked Tommy where it was. He said he couldn't find coordinates, just an address marker embedded in the metadata. It was a 6-digit number. I recognized it immediately. It matched the 11-digit code we'd found folded in Judas' locket. I checked the sheet where I'd written it down. The last 6 digits were 406,721. Now I had a name, a number, a buried girl, and a man who believed he was made from her pieces. I called Laurel, told her we needed to check one more place. A shelter outside of Charleston that used to process runaway youth in the late 90s. The building had long since shut down, but the intake logs were in storage. Took some convincing and a few fake titles, but we got access. In the 1999 entries, we found it. Name: Theo R. No last name listed. Brought in by a woman who used the name Alina K. Said she was his older sister. No documents, no contact info. Staff wrote that she spoke like she was reciting lines. One intake worker even noted, "Seems like she's acting out a script." I leaned against the metal shelf and closed my eyes. So, she had tried to find him. She found him, brought him somewhere safe, called herself Alina, and tried to make it work. That's what she'd been doing all these years. Running, hiding, waiting for a moment where she could fix what they broke. But it never lasted, and now she was gone. That night, I sat in my garage, staring at the tape, the photo, the logbooks, all of it. I kept asking myself why Judith had returned to Harlan. Not just to find Theo, not just to remember. I think she wanted to die where she had been erased. Full circle. The last act of rebellion, even if it cost her everything. Laurel said maybe it was her way of making sure the lie didn't outlive her. Then I thought of something else. Something Theo had said, back in the mirror room. She remembered me, and lied. I had taken that as betrayal. But what if it wasn't? What if it was protection? What if she knew what Theo had become, and said whatever she could to keep him from fracturing further? What if the lie was her way of loving him the only way she knew how, by pretending not to be afraid? The pieces were there. They had always been there. I just hadn't been listening closely enough. And then, just after midnight, my landline rang. Only 3 people had that number. 2 were asleep. The voice on the other end said, "You don't know what she stole." I froze. The line went dead. I stared at the receiver in my hand, heart thudding like it hadn't in years. The line had gone dead after that sentence. You don't know what she stole. No name, no threat. Just that voice, calm and hollow, like someone reading a label off a drawer they weren't supposed to open. I stood in my kitchen for a long time. Then I walked to the garage, pulled the tape out of the player, and locked it away. Laurel was already waiting in the driveway when I stepped outside. She hadn't called. She just knew. I told her about the call, about the voice, about the way it didn't sound like Theo. Not exactly. It was clearer, more composed, maybe even more dangerous. She didn't flinch. "There's always someone watching," she said. "You touch a nerve like this, it reacts, sometimes subtle, sometimes not." I asked her what she thought they meant by what she stole. Laurel said, she took something they thought they'd buried. A truth. A copy of herself. Maybe more. She handed me a flash drive. I copied the tape. "They're going to come for it." That wasn't a warning call. That was a reset. "You've rattled the cage." I stared at her. "Why give it to me?" Her answer was immediate. "Because you're not afraid of ghosts." I watched her drive off. Part of me wondered if I'd ever see her again. But I didn't have time to chase shadows. I had one more place to go. I drove to the Beckley grave for the 3rd and final time. This time, I brought a crowbar. I know how that sounds. Desecrating a grave. A man in my position doing something like that. But there are questions you can't leave unanswered. And this one had been staring me down since the beginning. Who or what was buried under Judith Ann Beckley's headstone. The ground was soft, the cemetery unguarded, and the county didn't spend money on deep burial vaults back then. It didn't take long to reach the casket. It was smaller than I expected, a child's box, untouched by time. I opened it slowly, heart pounding. Empty. No bones, no ash, no clothes, just a folded paper taped to the inside of the lid. I opened it under the moonlight. Typed. No signature. Just 2 lines. I was never here. Find the others. I stood there a long time, thinking about Theo, about Judith, about the tape looping again and again, about the butterflies, about all the names I would never know, all the faces buried in places without markers, all the children who'd been turned into test subjects, then ghosts, then myths. Most people wouldn't believe a word of it. That's fine. The truth doesn't ask for attention. It just asks not to be forgotten. I reburied the casket, left the paper in my coat. By sunrise, I'd already burned the copy of the tape Laurel gave me and sent another to someone I trusted 3 states away. If anyone came knocking, I'd have nothing but silence. And if they didn't, well, maybe that meant I wasn't the one they were really after. I gave my final report to the sheriff, left the details vague. Jane Doe, closed file, unsolved. They didn't ask many questions, not in a town like this. People want peace, not answers. Sometimes the truth costs too much. But I know what I saw. A girl who remembered, a boy who fractured, a program that was never supposed to exist, and a question that still keeps me up at night. How many more are out there? And when they come back, will anyone recognize their face?